Everyone, I am Jill Walsh, the Assistant Director at Positive Childhood Alliance Georgia. We recently had a brand change, formerly Prevent Child Abuse Georgia, but we're really focusing on what we want our outcomes to be, which is positive childhood and strong families for everyone in our state and beyond. So you might see our new logo, but recognize the pinwheel, and it's still PCA Georgia. We are so happy to have Nicole McDougald. She's the Interim Safety Director at the Division of Family and Children's Services. PCA Georgia, we do a lot around mandated reporting, also mandated supporting kind of before the report is made. How do we support families? How do we make that report and help recognize abuse and neglect? But we also get a lot of questions on what happens after the report. And that's where we rely heavily on our friends at the Division of Family and Children's Services, and specifically Nicole, who's one of our mandated reporters. And she is much bigger and beyond that and really is in touch with what happens after that report. And I think that gives a lot of solace to mandated reporters to know what's going to happen to that family or what they can expect afterwards for their own kind of legality as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our presenter, Nicole. As a reminder, put your questions in the chat box. We're going to be looking throughout. At the end, we will have an evaluation with a certificate of attendance for you all. And we're still seeing if we're going to be able to post this recording afterwards. So that is to be determined. But we might be able to share it internally with some of you guys if some of your colleagues aren't able to join. So with that, now I will officially pass it over to Nicole.
Good morning, everybody. Happy it is Tuesday. Yes, it's Tuesday. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm going to kind of give you a quick overview. I am the interim safety director right now for DFCS. I've been at DFCS almost 24 years, long time, and I've pretty much done it all. I've worked from being a case manager of the field, investigations, family preservations. I've done foster care. I've supervised all program areas to include resource development, and then kind of gone from there. I've managed a couple specialized units in the state that focused on particular cases like child deaths and serious injuries. And then I've also spent 5 years working with CICC, which is the entity that takes all of your reports and processes into the field. And right now over safety, I use all that experience to, focus on safety in Georgia and what that is for how we incorporate that into the DFCS world. So I'm going to take you through what happens after the report, but in order to get to what happens after the report, we're going to spend just a few minutes going through a little bit on how you make a report. And I recognize some of your names, so you might have seen some of this before, but I always feel like a refresher is, not a bad thing. So we'll just spend a few minutes going through some information about making reports and kind of what the information we're looking for when you do make the report, and then go into more of an overview of what happens after the report. Like I said, there's so many different avenues at DFCS of things to be considered and how things go different paths. And so, like I said, I'm going to try to give you a good overview, but DFCS is never been completely left or completely right. We kind of sit in the middle. So there's never one, these are always going to be screen outs or these are always going to be assigned. There's a lot of different intricate details that get figured into each situation. So keep that in mind as we're talking. And I do end with some examples that I'm waiting for some crowd participation on when we get to the end. But I hope you guys learned something. So let's jump in. So who's a mandated reporter? Like I said, just a couple quick slides to kind of jumpstart us. We know we've got certain professionals that are listed as mandated reporters. I do believe most people on this that I've seen in the chat are mandated reporters, and I've got my chat kind of over here, which is why I keep looking to my other screen. Y'all, I don't know how I ever worked without two screens. It's the best thing I've ever done. A couple highlights from 1975, and if you want to read more about it, this is the specific code that talks about mandated reporting, lists out every position that is a mandated reporter, gives you all the good meat and potato information. So should you feel interested, dive into that. Here are your 3 highlights: is that any report, any suspected child abuse or neglect report should be made immediately, but no later than 24 hours after, to your local DFCS office or law enforcement. If you're in a situation that is a designated delegate, so certain schools, some hospitals, some social agencies have and facilities have a person who is the person that's you have to notify. So if you have a suspicion of child abuse or neglect, then you tell that person, and that person is then expected to make the report. If you have a working situation like that, then you have told that person about your concerns about abuse or neglect, whether they make the report or not, you are been deemed to have fully complied with the subsection and the law and the expectations. And then any person or official required by the subsection C of this code to report suspected child abuse or neglect who knowingly and willfully fails to do so shall be guilty of a misdemeanor. So I think it's very important for people to understand what the expectations are. There are 3 ways to make a report. Some of my old school people know that there were 4 ways. And there was a fax number. We are really trying to get rid of the fax number so we don't advertise that anymore. If you have that and you use that, it still will come to us, but we are trying very hard to phase that out and come into this century. Faxes can be challenging to read. Some of them are still handwritten. So if you've got a friend who's still using a fax and you can help them to come to one of these other ways of reporting, we would greatly appreciate it. I will personally send you some information to help to pass along some information if we can get everybody into one of these other avenues. The first one's the phone number, which I think you recognize, and that's for anyone to make a report, whether you're mandated or not. And then in the IVR, that's the interactive voice response, you have different codes 1, 2, 3, 4, like you have different areas for depending on what position you're in and how you're reporting. CPS website's my favorite way for people to make reports. Like I said, the websites and emails are only open to mandated reporters. So if you are not a mandated reporter, we would ask that it not be used. We do look for that. We do sometimes send out reminders for that. But the website, I think, is a fantastic way to report it. It keeps every report you've ever made in one central area. So you've got all the information you've ever known, especially if you've worked with this family for a long time. You can, pull up reports you've made in the past. I think it just houses everything wonderfully. And then there's no waiting. I know CICC works very hard to answer the phone timely, but occasionally there are more phone calls than there are people to take them, and there is a little bit of a hold time. Like I said, they work really hard on that, but with the website, you just send the report. So, and everything moves beautifully. So that's my little plug for that, and I always take that opportunity to plug that. And then just one slide on data. These were some of the last numbers that I've got pulled, which was the end of the 4th quarter and then of January. So you can see, and this is for the total contact volume coming into CICC. So that's not per se assigned reports or screened out reports, but is a combination of everything that comes in. Every phone call, every request for information, every report, it's all encompassed in this. So there was just over 17,000 in September. September and March are 2 of our highest months traditionally. It goes down a tiny bit in October, down a little more in November, down a little more in December. January is a little lower than normal for this year. Does anyone have a guess why it kind of tapers down a little bit in November and December?
Children spend more time inside.
Yeah.
Inside, that's a good guess.
School is out.
There you go. The school is the #1 reporter to DFACS. Summers are very, very low. There's an average of 8,000 or 9,000 a month for June and July. August tips right back up. But yes, so November, you've got an entire week off of school and normally 1 or 2 holidays before that. And if it's a voting year, then you've normally got that day off of school too. And then December, there's a good 2 weeks off of school. So yes, that is a very strong reason why it's kind of starts tapering down right there. Okay, so just a few more slides about making reports, then we're moving into the rest. So what we're looking for, like this is, I always like to give a little background on how to make a strong report. And I recognize that when you've got the information you have, sometimes you don't have everything that you know that you need or that you want to have. But if you can get this, or you've got a way and this absolutely does help DFACS make the best decisions. So first component is you have to have an allegation of maltreatment and an impact to a child under the age of 18. We do still get phone calls and reports for kids who are over 18. The law says under 18, so we can't do anything of that. We can send them to APS, the Adult Protective Services. We commonly do that if it looks like there's a young adult in a precarious situation. But we cannot take care of that. We need a caregiver component. There are times that we get reports. I'll give you an example of that where there is, say, a mother and a child who are in the gas station. There's an act of violence. Maybe the mother got hit in the head with something at the gas station and knocked out. The child was there as witness it. We'll get reports on that. I'll say commonly, we're probably going to screen that out because there's not a caregiver component. That mother didn't do anything wrong. They were at a store and she was a victim of violence. That was something outside of her control. So just so you know, like we do get a lot of those reports about things happening to a child, but something that doesn't have a caregiver. We need the alleged maltreatment perpetrator in Georgia. Supports or resources already provided to the family. That's just really great to know, especially for a lot of our mandated reporters. I saw we've got a lot of CASAs on here. A lot of people from schools. I see decal. Like if there's something that you know your agency has already provided to this family, you've been trying to help them through, you've trying to help mitigate the situation, and you can tell us what those are, that's really great for us to know. And then history with the family. It's great to know what other mandated reporters know about this family. We also look at our history and we also look at what supports or resources DFCS may have already provided to the family. So we look at that as well, but knowing that from the agencies making reports is great information. There is one exception to the caregiver component, which is an allegation of a commercially sexually exploited child, which we commonly refer to as CSEC. That if a child is alleged to be a victim of CSEC and is being actively abused or neglected at the time, it does not have to be by a caregiver. So we can evaluate that a little differently. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. And then the information when you call and make a report, or if you use the mandated reporter website, remember that plug there, this is the information you're going to be asked. So these 8 questions are really the meat and potatoes of what, I think I'm already hungry this morning. I realize I've mentioned meat and potatoes twice. How CICC makes their decisions, how DFCS makes the decisions. Some of the questions look very similar to the other questions, and there are a lot of times I think people look at them and think, well, I've already answered that there, so I'm not going to answer this here. But each question here has a purpose and an intent, and it's helping make the decision and drive the response that DFCS will or won't have. And so they're each important. So I would ask you just to answer each one the best you can. If you don't know it, then write, I don't know it, or I don't have this answer. And that way you won't necessarily get a call back by someone saying, what's the answer to this when you didn't know it? Don't leave it blank, just write and you don't know. So quickly, we'll break down these 8 questions. The first 2 questions are how we're determining, is there an allegation of abuse or neglect and impact to the child by a caregiver? Those are the things we're looking for. So, and I'll give you some examples. So tell how the maltreater neglected or abused the victim child. So we're looking for things like left the 3-year-old child home alone, hit the child with a cord, doesn't feed the child on the weekends, has no food in the home. And then the second question, you remember that from where we talked about the maltreatment, how has the neglect or abuse harm or affected the child? The code section of the law says we need to have a harm or effect. And I'll say as a plug, I recognize that in some instances of emotional abuse or domestic violence, you may not have a very strong harm or effect on that child yet, but you know when you've done the research on it, you've been trained how that impacts the brain and functioning. Do the best you can to piece that out. That's hard even for myself sometimes to piece that out. I know it's there, it's just, it's not showing itself as well as some yet. So don't not report it because you can't quite articulate that. Like I said, do the best you can with it. So examples of the second question would be child has no supervision in the home, the child's in pain and has welts on their body, or marks from being disciplined. The child's hungry, complains of stomach pain, is hoarding food at school, expresses fear of not being fed at home, things like that. The next 6 questions, after we get the first 2 answered, are how the agency determines what the response is going to be. If there should be a response, how quick the response should be, if there's another resource that can be provided. So number 3 is, when did the maltreatment last occur? We're looking for a date. We have to have a date to go in our system. So it was yesterday, 2 weeks ago, July 14th, happens every day. Give us a date. How often does the maltreatment occur? We're looking for a pattern. Is this a one-off or is this over and over again? So hourly, weekly, monthly, every day when the parents go to work. Last night when the parents became angry with the child and hit him with a cord, or it happens every weekend. Is the maltreatment happening now? This is really a yes or no. Yes, right now, no, the child's at school, but the maltreatment will be happening when the child gets home, or the child's left home alone every Friday night. Since tomorrow is Friday, we can infer that it's going to happen again tomorrow. Or it happened once. It happened once. The parents mitigated it. It's never happened again. How did you become aware of the maltreatment? And this is when we're looking for who our witnesses are going to be, who knows the story, who understands what happened. So the child told you, or you witnessed the event, saw the injuries on the child, you heard it from a family member, a teacher, a neighbor, medical records, police report. Like, how did you become aware of it? Does the maltreater have access to the child now? This is a yes or no. The children are at home, they're at school, they're with a foster parent. Like I said, we're determining if everything else is met. We've got an allegation, we've got a caregiver component, we've got abuse or neglect. Now we're looking for, what are the patterns? What's the family need? How quick do we need to respond? This is where, like I said, these tie in. And then where's the child at this time? If I were to leave my office right now to go find this child, where would I find this child? So school, home, police department, hospital, like where exactly is the location? All right, so those are questions. Anything now? Oh, slow down. Okay. I'll work on that. I get excited and I start talking faster. Okay, so those are the questions that we have from CICC. I've got listed out a couple other unique ways that cases go before we get into the screen in, screen out. So I wanted to give some additional information on that. So anyone in our school system is going to see that we've got our House Bill 530s. This came out really within the last couple years. This is specific to children being withdrawn from a public school. So there may not be any of those other questions that you can answer on the slide we just went over, but this is where a child or a student has been withdrawn. So, above the age of 6, withdrawn from the school and has missed 45 days or more without the home study program declaration of intent form filled out with Georgia Department of Education. So this goes in to help make sure that our children really don't go missing. Sometimes there's a child at the school that the school's been very concerned about, and they kind of watch them. Maybe they've made some reports on you. They kind of keep an eye on this child. And then we go into May, school gets out, and, go through the summer, school starts again in August, and that child just doesn't come back to school. And no one really knows why. This kind of serves to help make sure that 45 days in, that there's a way to make a report on that this child didn't show back up to school. And there's not a home study program declaration of intent filed. There's not been another school that's requested records, because we know that happens pretty quick. Those cases come into us a little differently, and that is so we can check on that well-being of that child to ensure that that child isn't being, one, without education, or two, in away from the eyes of our mandated reporters. We just need to know that child's okay. If defects determined through our assessment that the parents intend to evade or prevent meeting the child's educational needs, then we make a new report for educational neglect, which is one of the neglect spectrum cases, and then we will work it through that. So like I said, we will go out and start assessing through this. Okay. And then we're going to go over the supplemental supplemental questions for educational neglect.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Julie. I'm a school social worker.
Hi, Julie.
I've made many of those reports about students that have, there's been 45 days, we can't find them, we've looked, no, we've not received any records, like you said. The issue is the only contact information we're going to have is the last known address, the last,
Yep.
And a lot of times we've already exhausted that trying to find them. And so when we make the report, it's like, we don't know what happens, that we don't get feedback. We don't, it's like, we're kind of putting it out there. And and then I've been asked before, well, do you have a current? And I'm like, no, we don't know where they are. So
Right. If you had a current address, you would have gone out there, right? I missed that last thing you said. I apologize.
I just said, can you comment on that and give us direction on what we need to do, how, or, if there's anything we can do.
I don't think there's anything you can do. I think you're still going to get asked that just in case, you heard something or, maybe it's a small community and you heard that the family may have moved to another one. I think you would already give that. You'll probably still be asked that, but we've got ways, internally at DFACS, we can check the eligibility system to see if they're getting, food stamps or TANF or Medicaid, things like that. A lot of times if people want to evade DFACS, evade the child welfare side of DFACS, they still want their benefits. So it's more likely that there will be an actual address on file in that system if they are getting those benefits. So we can check that. And we've got access to a couple other kind of government type search engines that we can use to look for families. I do very much appreciate you making those reports because it is concerning me. I've seen some scary things happen to some kids who have just kind of disappeared from the radar. So I appreciate that you're making those, but I don't think there's anything you should change. Continue to make those. Like I said, you'll probably get asked that question. If you have any other information or if you think you know where they are, I mean, you don't because they haven't registered, no other schools contacted you. You give us that information and then we will then look through what we have in our access to see if we can find the family and start looking from there. And I'm about to say, I think worst case scenario, if we can't find the family either, it still stays in our system. It doesn't change anything. We may put all our diligent efforts in there and close it, but if and when the family resurfaces, it will be reflected in our system in such a way as something with an alert on it. So we will then know that this is a family that we are concerned about that we were not able to find, and we will then be able to address the past concerns with whatever the current concerns are coming in. So it is good for us to have that in the system so we know where to find them. Did that answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Okay, wonderful. So these supplemental questions right here, I'll say, take a screenshot of them, use your cell phone, take a little snip or something. These questions, if you are using, you'll be asked these questions if you call in, if you are making a report of educational neglect, not a House Bill 530, but just straight up, this kid's enrolled, they're just not appearing or there are other concerns. If you could answer those, if you're using the online form, the mandated reporter form, or sending it by email, if you go ahead and provide these answers, it will speed things up. And I will also say that these were written during the pandemic, which is why some of them still reflect kind of pandemic style things. They have not been changed. So for educational neglect, we would like to know the additional information of how many days the child has missed. Is the child attending traditional, virtual, or homeschool? Like I said, pandemic question. What has been done to provide support to the family to address the attendance concern? What actions has a caretaker taken to address the issue? And have there been previous concerns of truancy with this family? And then we had a note that, and like I said, I pulled this straight out of our policy, that if we're not going to consider educational neglect if the parents are not aware of the truancy concern. So if the child was routinely failing to log into virtual class, or to make it more current, maybe the child gets on the school bus to ride to school every day. The parent sees the child get on the school bus, but once they get to school, they dart behind the school and then disappear and they're not at school all day. The parent doesn't know and isn't part of it, then they can't really be held responsible for it. But in cases where the parent just doesn't get up, isn't sending this, isn't putting the child on the bus, isn't getting the child there, isn't doing anything, the school's addressed it, they've done everything they can to mitigate it, they've worked with the parent, I've seen a lot of alarm clocks be bought for families. Things like that, when it's just not getting anywhere. You're setting up meetings for the parent, you're going to the home to try to talk to them, you're setting up meetings for them to come to the school to address things, to figure out how you can help them be engaged in this process, and they're just refusing to participate. That is absolutely something that would fall under educational neglect. I will add that in different regions across the state, they have kind of different expectations with their Board of Educations around. So it's not going to be completely consistent with the whole state. There are some counties that will, if the child's missed 10 days, they've got, understandings with their school that they know this is how many days that we want you to make this report no later than, and the counties will go out, whereas some counties want it to be a little more closer to 20 or 25. So depending on which county you're in, if you're in the school system or working within that, let's say get with your local DFACS and kind of talk about what regionally their expectations are around this, because the law doesn't define it as a certain day. You're looking for an impact. So you may have one kid that's missed more days, but is still passing every subject and doing very well, and a kid who's missed very few days that is can't read, can't write, and is extremely far behind. So there's going to be a different impact there. Talk about human trafficking, like I said, CSEC, which is the commercially sexually exploited child. This is something else that we are seeing a lot of these days, and it is not metro specific. I'll say a lot of people think, oh, it's all Atlanta. It's not. We see it all across the state. So this is just 2 slides. I've got 2 or 3 slides about some of the definitions we're looking for that fit into specific policies. And like I said, I'm kind of giving you an overview of all the different kind of intakes and policies that kind of come in, just so you got a broad understanding of all the different things we're looking for. So you have someone who's been a victim of human trafficking, or we're talking about more specifically the children that are part of this. And these are pulled, like I said, straight out of legal codes, to when the child has been subjected or maintained for sexual servitude. Child's been recruited, enticed, harbored, transported, provided, or been solicited, patronized, or obtained by any means an individual for the purpose of sexual servitude, or benefits financially or by receiving anything of value from the sexual servitude of another. The anything of value is something that we really focus on at DFCS, because a value may not be my value or your value, but it is anything that values to that person. So if you have a teenager that has left their home for whatever reason, they're unhappy at the home, maybe they're being abused at the home, they think another home is better, and they are doing any kind of sexual favors to spend the night somewhere, or they did a sexual favor to get a meal from McDonald's, that is something of value. Spending the night is a value. Food is a value. You know, obviously things like hair, nails, things like that, that's all value, but just some of the little things that you wouldn't necessarily immediately, go to are going to be in exchange of something of value. You know, you can do this for me. If you do this for me, you can borrow my cell phone to make phone calls. That is something of value. That was very mind-opening to me when I started learning those specific codes. And so I want to make sure that that wasn't something I automatically thought of, and I wanted to share that with other people, so we all kind of have that same idea. It could be something very, very small. It's not, a car or something financially large. These are some additional questions. If you are reporting that you think a child is a victim of CSEC, these are some additional things that we're interested in. Like I said, you may not know any of these things. You may just have a hunch. They may have heard something, but these are questions that you should be asked. So if you have any of these answers and can provide them, that would be great. So, why do you suspect sex trafficking? Does the child have an older boyfriend or girlfriend, 5 years of age or older? Does the child have money or expensive new belongings that the child claims are gifts that you just think something's not right here? Tattoos are a big one. Tattoos on the his or her chest, neck, arms, description of the tattoos, branding tattoos, butterfly tattoos, like something very specific. There are certain things and trends that go around. I'll say the crowns are very big. There's a lot of branding with crowns. And that's, the crowns that you wear, like a tiara crown, not like, my Southern crayons over here, but the crown on your head. Are the child's caregivers aware of the boyfriend or girlfriend, the gifts, the tattoos? What does the caregiver think about that? Like, your son's come home with a brand new cell phone, new Nikes, a bunch of expensive things. You didn't buy them. You ask, where these things come from? Oh, my friend let me have them. Like, is the parent suspicious about that? Or is it just like, oh, that's cool. That's the way people function. Like, are they asking any questions? Is there a way that maybe they should kind of know that maybe there's a concern there? Does the child have a history of runaway or truant behavior? Does the child have a history of substance abuse, sexualized behavior, changes in behavior, or association with a very, a different group of friends, possibly older people they haven't kind of hung out with before? All right, so there's that. Then we're going to jump into plan of safe care. Like I said, DFCS is so much bigger than what people think of with the abuse or neglect. There's so many other little finite things that we're specifically looking for in different kind of avenues of things. So I wanted to put this all here. We have a plan of safe care, which goes specifically, these are for infants who have been prenatally exposed. So this is going to be specific to their mamas who are pregnant, who are using substances, and we get reports to DFCS, which is an expectation under CAPTA. It's a federal expectation of any child who's been birth exposed while in utero to a substance. That may be the only allegation that we get, is that the child or the mother tested positive for something, but mom's mentally and physically prepared for the child. They've got all the resources they need. They got good family support. There may not be any other allegation of maltreatment. So there are certain ways that we specifically handle those cases for an assessment and resources. So what we're looking for in those cases is the infant being prenatally exposed resulting from the mother's use of prescribed medication for an illness. Mother needs to be following the medication and treatment plan is verified by the health care provider. That will be one of the things we're looking for. You're also looking for prenatally exposed resulting from the mother being given prescribed medication during the delivery process. There's some reports of that. There's not as many. I know for the women on the call that sounds a little daunting because most of us probably had medication when we were delivering. And then the infant being prenatally exposed to the mother's participation in a medication-assisted treatment program for a substance use disorder. And as long as that person is complying, like I said, those will go in. They come in as a different type of case for DFCS and get provided with resources, sometimes directly by DFCS, sometimes by another contracted agency, someone maybe through DPH. We have a couple other contracted companies that work with us that are substance abuse providing entities that will help do the plan of safe care with the mother to kind of talk about resources and referrals and what she may or may not need, what she has in the family. Okay, so now what to expect after your report. So like I said, I want to kind of go over all those. We're doing, yes, get on time, right. So after your report, so after all that information is considered, all the things that we've had, we now look for, like I said, caregiver component, allegation of abuse or neglect, impact to the child. So considering all those things, considering the history with the child, the information that's been provided, we take all that into, I don't want to say under advisement, but we consider it all. We assess it all, and then we go with our processing. So CICC begins to process. If you've made the report, in the past it said CICC would call you back within 2 hours. That's only now if additional information is needed. If you make a report and you don't get a call back, then everything you provided was clear. There weren't any questions and it was processed as is. If we need additional information, there's a question that wasn't answered or someone's not clear on something, they will call you back. If you prefer that person to email you, they can email you. I'd say it should be within about 2 hours of you making the report. So if you know that you're making a report at 4:55 and you're leaving an office at your office at 5 and that's the phone number you gave, maybe consider giving a phone number that you could actually be reached on. So I will say cases can't be held. They can't, if someone's processing that at 6 o'clock that night and they're trying to get you and they've tried to call you 2 times and they can't get you, they're going to process it as is because that's what they have to do. They cannot wait to the morning when you call them back and hold it and then process it. Then that will have already cleared by then. They've got an expectation to clear the cases and move. So, if you cared enough to make the report and you're meeting that, you probably want to be able to answer those questions. The internal report processing is about 2 hours. It goes a lot faster in the morning. I'll say in the afternoon, normally between the hours on a general Monday through Friday when school is in, between 8 and about 4:30, they're averaging between 600 and 800 reports. Commonly, there's 30 to 35 people working. So you kind of do that math to see how many cases need to be processed and how quick things have to move. So with that, in the morning times, the volume is much, much lower. So things are going to process a lot faster. In the afternoon, things may route for a few extra minutes into the processing. So it kind of pushes back the delay each little bit. So the highest volume times are by about noon, things quadruple. So that's the other plug too. If you were a mandated reporter and you've got something to report, the earlier you can report it, the better. It just helps us because so many of our reports, like I said, come from the school and the school teachers have to do things on the schedules that they're, permitted to have. As a reporter, you may also get a call back from the county. There's a two-way flow of information. The reports, everything comes into CICC to be processed. CICC can make a decision with it to screen it out or screen it in. Once that decision goes to the county can accept the decision that's been made or they can change it. So the county knows their families, they know their resources, and they probably know you as their local partner. So they may call you to ask some clarifying information to try as they're trying to finalize the decision that they want. They may not. It's not an absolute, but there's a chance. So just say you get a phone call. Don't be surprised.
And we have a
Uh,
question in the chat box. It says it can wait to the end, but it kind of applies now. Do
Yep.
caseworkers see the reports we make that are screened in? And I'm assuming it might also mean that are screened in and screened out.
Yes. For screened in, yes, they see the reports you make. And if you have filled it out on a written form, then that is uploaded. So I think most people are aware. I'll say that CICC will condense the information. If you've sent 3 paragraphs, we're looking for the allegation of abuse and neglect, the caregiver component, what's been done, and we're going to make that a much shorter paragraph to say, this is why the county needs to go out now. But say you've listed out every bit of history you've ever known on this family. Like I said, you've got 3 very solid, well-written paragraphs. They will see that because that all the original reports that you send that come through email, right now fax as well, but email and the mandated reporter site do get uploaded into the system in our external documents. And most caseworkers know to go there because that's where they get all the other little finite details that may be synchronized, we call it, kind of out of the report to give them the who, what, why, when, go now kind of information. It kind of clarifies it a little bit. So yes, they do get that. If you are calling in, that is normally put straight into the system. So that may be synchronized as it is. So like I said, it's one reason why we love a written report because it's easier. The county sees everything that you've written. The supervisor that's even staffing the case with the case manager at CICC who's making the decision will also read that. So they're not just going on what's written on the page, but they can look at what's been synchronized and what the original report is. So yes, the county will have that. I occasionally hear that people say, oh, I didn't have access to it. It is uploaded in the system. And if there's some reason they're having a system is being worked on, then it will be emailed. So it is accessible and there is a way to have that and they all should have that.
Can I speak to this as well?
Yeah.
Sorry, this is Julie again, school social worker. I also, when we make a CPS report from the school system, any of our schools, we also download it and we send it to our county DFCS director, the report that we submitted online. And the reason being is we were finding that, and I think you answered it when you said maybe some things are condensed, but some of the information was not being given that our county DFCS, I guess, felt was important or whatever. And so, I mean, it just wasn't, the full story wasn't given a lot of times. And so, so we've just started, when we do a report, we also send that report to our county director. And that way they have access to look at exactly what we submitted. And that's been helpful for us in our county.
That's perfect. And it sounds like you're using the mandated reporter site or using the
Been
email.
doing it since you dropped it many years ago. So yes.
Wonderful. Thank
Yes,
you.
all
Thank
our-
you for that plug.
Yes,
And
we
that's one
love
thing I
it,
love
and
about it is the
yes.
PDF option.
Yeah, and just also, you know, it keeps a running tab of your reports that you've made. The other thing we found with phone calls, you know, and that was, we had to really work with some of the counselors on breaking that cycle because they think, well, it's faster to make a phone call. But in the long run, it's really not. And then 2, they print off the report and then the administrator of the building signs off on it because they're the ones, you know, it's coming from their building. And so they need to know the reports being made and what was said and stuff. And so it's just checks and balances for us. And then a copy is sent to the central office as well. And they keep, so we know kind of what's going on. We keep a record if there's any.
Exactly. You have highlighted all the things I love about the mandated reporter system. And there's so many entities, like you said, that need an additional copy of the PDF. And you've got right there verification that you made it, the time, the date, all the information that was provided. I know I'm glad you spoke about that. A lot of different areas that do work in partnership with their DFCS and some of the supervisors or the county directors do love to be copied on it at the time. Cause like I shared that there's about a 2-hour processing time, especially as things get later in the day and the volume picks up to where when you make the report to when the county is notified about it. And so there's some counties I'm gonna say each county is different. And it kind of probably depends on the volume of the county, but where some county directors or the CPS supervisors love to have that information right then and there because they kind of know, they kind of know how things are going to be assigned or what's going on with it. And regardless of the decision that CICC makes, they may look at this and go, we need to go out on this, and they could go ahead and be working on it. I'll say so. Definitely work in partnership with your local county. But that information is, I'll reassure you, is uploaded in the system as an external documents. Every once in a while, I hear a worker say, well, you didn't send it to us. And I say, it's right here. And I'll go look, and it's there. And they just didn't go there to look. So, but it is there. We do keep track of that because that information should be provided. But that's a great also alternative. Like I said, I know there's a lot of strong partnership there. So if you do the written you get a written confirmation if you do report online. So you get the email confirmation verifying the receipt of the report. If it's completed on the mandated reporter site, pops up as soon as you do it. You'll get your mandated reporter letter emailed in about 24 hours. That automatically goes to the system. And I will say it goes through when the intake clears. So if that intake, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, is assigned as a screen out and refer, until the county completes that process, it won't clear the system. And so that may be delayed just a little bit. But like, I think like Julie's already highlighted, for those of you working in different regions, different areas, I completely support you having a close friend at the DFCS office. Find a friend, make a friend, have a friend, because that is someone that you can confirm with to say, you know, I made this report. Did you get it? Or here's the email copy of the report I made. Have you guys gotten it yet? Who's it's assigned to? And that person can kind of give you that information. The CIC cannot give you that information. So I always say friend in the county. So for intake assignments, this is how we're talking about what comes in and what goes out. So we have two choices for the point of intake. We can screen it in or screen it out. Screening cases have the allegation of maltreatment by a caregiver to a child under the age of 18. I'm going to keep saying that. Y'all are going to have it all. Just it's going to float through your head at night. As I've said, the allegations of a child being commercially sexually exploited do not require the caregiver component. We do not consider the person who's exploiting that child a caregiver unless that person is actually a caregiver, because unfortunately, sometimes parents do this. But more often than not, it's not a parent. And even that person may be providing for that child, they are providing a good or a service to get something in return. And that is not someone we're going to consider a caregiver, but we will still assess that. A screened out contains an allegation that does not rise to the level of maltreatment, or it doesn't have a caregiver component, kind of like I mentioned, you know, a mom and a child being at a gas station when mom got hit in the head by something. That doesn't have a caregiver component. Yes, it was an act of violence that took place in front of a child, and maybe that family could benefit from a service, but that's a service that there's another community entity that can provide, and that parent didn't do anything wrong in that situation. A caveat to the screened out is if the agency has already received a report on the same incident of maltreatment, same victim child, the case will be screened out as a duplicate. There's nothing in your letter, your mandated reporter letter, that's going to say it's a duplicate. It's just going to say it's screened out. So if you know you made a really strong report of abuse and neglect, you know that should have been assigned. You kind of know how DFCS works. You knew that was a solid, and it comes back as a screen out. Again, friend in the county, that's a big thing, but kind of think about who else might have beat you to it. Maybe there's a child in elementary school and a sibling in middle school, and that child in elementary school has already disclosed that incident, and that school counselor has already made the report. It could have been the police officer the night before. Some of our really big, more, I'd say kind of tragic maltreatment things normally get 3 and 4 reports on them, because, and which is good, because what you don't want is 4 different mandated reporters being involved and everyone thinking someone else is going to make the report and no one makes the report. So follow the law, do what's told, make the report. Especially, I mean, if you're standing next to the person who's making a report, you know, maybe you can provide your information as well. You know it's being made, but don't just make an assumption that someone else said they were going to do it. They might not have gotten around to it. And I've seen that several times. Like I said, you may get something that says screen out. If you have questions about that and you've got your friend in the county, you can check and say, hey, I made this. Was it screened out? Because you already have another one. And that person who knows, you can probably say, yeah, we're already, you know, so-and-so, you know, Kendrick is already working with this family. And then you can reasonably assume that someone beat you to the report and the family's been reported, and that's what you need to know.
Nicole, we have a question in the chat box.
Yeah.
What about a child-on-child allegation?
We will get to that.
Okay, so we'll put that one on hold. Thank you,
Yes.
Maggie.
That's always a big one too. So here is my pictures, because a picture's worth 1,000 words, of how cases get assigned. So there's, like I said, a couple different ways that we already kind of talked about, like a plan of safe care is going to be a different type of assignment. A House Bill 530 is going to be a different type of assignment. The majority of cases assigned through DFACS come in as an ISA case, which comes in as an initial safety assessment track. And what that means is it is given a response time of either immediate 24 hours or 5 days. And then once the caseworker gets out there to assess it, they kind of make a determination that now I'm getting ahead of myself that we'll go through of how the case should progress. So for this slide, we're looking at how the decision is made to go with an immediate, a 24-hour or 5 day. And I'll say the majority of our cases are 5 days is what we're looking at. An immediate is present danger. That is clearly observable. You don't have to ask yourself, is this child in immediate danger? The child is in immediate danger. We say if you have to stop and ask if the child's in danger, the child's probably not in danger. That is something you see. So my picture to depict that is this squirrel. The hawk is taking the squirrel. It's going like that squirrel's in danger right now. There's no, maybe it will be okay. Maybe you can see the danger. It's there. For, a child, say maybe there's a toddler on the side of the road. That child is in danger right now. That is not it's different from a kid who's got a lot of injuries in the hospital. That child's also in danger, but the child's in the hospital right now, and that mitigates a tiny bit of the danger. A kid on the side of the road is absolutely, you show up at home and there's, toddlers and a baby at home alone. There's no one else there. Those kids are in danger. A 24-hour is impending danger. So that is up to 24 hours to meet it. So the present danger is not there. It's not happening right now, but it's likely within 24 hours that this child will be in danger. I'll say more so often, a lot of our more serious injuries where kids are in the hospital show up more as a 24-hour because there are medical personnel. There are things there. That kid is absolutely in danger. It's got a lot of, unexplained broken injuries that wouldn't meet for that child's age. However, the child is now in a facility. We're starting there, so we need to be there within 24 hours to assess that. So you can see our squirrel, and I'm gonna go with a hawk, but I'm not quite, if I'm not at the right bird, y'all can let me know. Maybe that squirrel will be okay. Maybe the squirrel won't. You can see that there's this level of impending danger there that you can reasonably assume that something bad might happen. And then our little 5-day squirrel, there's an allegation of maltreatment, but there's not a present or an impending danger, but there is something that needs to be assessed. Like I said, an allegation of maltreatment, that's our little sweet baby squirrel. Looks like the baby squirrel needs some services, maybe needs some nutrients, maybe needs some food, needs a little something, needs some resources there to help address things so it does not become, grow up to become the 24-hour or the immediate danger squirrel. Okay. The 5-day looks sad. It is sad. Though it is not dead. Sometimes people say, I did not put a dead squirrel up there. There's a question. Jill, do you want me to answer the question? Okay.
You
So
can
the
go
question
ahead.
is,
I can get that one.
I can do it. Okay. I just happen to see it. So the question is, what happens if the local DFACS office doesn't answer the phones, lock the doors, makes it almost impossible to get a hold of them? What's your next step be? I'll say since the pandemic, the offices are staffed, but people aren't there the same way they used to be. I think people learned how to work very well at home. And I'll say, as somebody who spent the majority of my career in child welfare doing investigations, there was not a lot of time I was in the office because I was constantly at somebody's home running back and forth. So with that, I'd say you need someone, if you're looking for child welfare information, you've got to have someone in child welfare. So someone at the front desk isn't going to be able to help you. They don't have access to the systems that child welfare uses. You're going to need a CPS worker. It could be a foster care worker, but like if you're looking for more CPS concerns, it's likely going to be a CPS worker or a supervisor or someone of that entity who is there to support. So I would recommend reaching out to the county director, and if you want to ask after or whatnot, I can give you some information on who the county director is to ask for who can be the resource to help for this situation, and let them kind of designate somebody. Like I said, I've seen sometimes it's a worker, sometimes it's a supervisor, sometimes there's an admin support person who has access to some of the systems who can kind of help keep things moving, to answer some questions about, like to say, to form that bond, build the bridge, and to be able to communicate openly. That's what I would recommend. And if there's still issues after that, then, each county has a region that they're part of, and each region has a regional director, and then there are district directors. But I would start to see if, local supervisor or the county director can help work that out. Okay. So another subsection of reports we have, like I said, this is kind of the smaller subsection. There's certainly more plaintiff safe cares than this. Would be a special investigation. And right now those are assigned as either an immediate or 24-hour only. There are only 3 types of allegations that show up that could be a special investigation, and that's allegations that a child's been seriously injured, near fatally injured, or has died. Allegations of abuse or neglect at a foster home or an adoptive home, or allegations of abuse or neglect at a school or facility. Like I said, this is a pretty small subset of cases, but there are specific case expectations for these and how they roll. Okay. So for our screened out reports, and I feel like there might have been a question about this earlier. For cases that are screened out, so remember there's an allegation of maltreatment, but it doesn't rise to a level to be, intervened by DFCS. Not talking about the duplicate reports that are already signed, but on its own merit, it does not rise to something that DFCS can intervene with. So there's 2 ways that can go. For a screen out and refer, that is something, and this is literally the information in quotes, is something we specifically put in the referral. Like, I took this straight out of an intake. We refer it to the county to consider the family for a referral to agency or community resources to preventatively address child vulnerabilities and enhance caregiver protective capacities. These are referrals. Like I said, it could be a child on child, but we'll get to that. It could be poverty related. Think of things like that. Poverty related. Maybe the family needs food. The family's struggling with housing. Maybe the child or the parent has a mental health diagnosis that isn't leading to a dangerous situation, but the child could benefit. Maybe the child's got some behavioral needs that could, benefit from services, some counseling, some community intervention. So there are things that we know for a long time, DFCS has almost been, we've never been the only agency, but for so long, all the information has come to us for DFCS to act and do something, and DFCS cannot do this alone. And so there's some things that would just be better served by a community agency, by, a CSB, or by, school social workers, or by a local mental health agency. I kind of already threw that out there. Maybe the local food pantry. There are, depending on your community, different resources that may really be a better fit for that family and may be able to serve that need and help that family, as opposed to a DFCS investigation. So we are looking for that as like, what else does this family need? The other side, that's a screen out, is no agency intervention or assessment. I'll say in a screen out and refer, we can literally do anything with that. There won't be an assessment, but we can call the family. We can send we send a letter to the family. We can do a referral for the family for services and let them know by letter. Like, we can, in some cases, someone, a worker from DFCS has gone out to talk to the family. Like I said, they're not making an assessment, but gone out to talk about some services. So we can fit just about anything in that screen out and refer to kind of get the means to an end to help the family with something, except an assessment. Like I said, I don't want to say that enough, because you're not making an assessment under a screen out and refer. And then a screen out isn't going to be, that's no agency intervention or assessment. So if a report comes in on a family and we've screened it out because it doesn't rise to the level of abuse or neglect to intervene on, that's it. The family isn't notified. The mandated reporter will know that it's screened out, but that's it. Like, we don't send a letter, we don't make a phone call, we don't do anything with it. It stays in our system for future reference, but there's not going to be any agency action on that. Like I said, if the agency's already received a report on the same incident, that will be screened out as well. But again, and it will be addressed in the current case, but it's not going to show as a duplicate report or anything else. It will just say screened out. Okay. So where do reports go? So I've kind of covered this, and I'm kind of jumping a little bit, but I was trying to keep it interesting. So all reports go to CICC, are sent to the county where the caregiver lives. The only exception to that, and I said is DFCS, and there's almost an exception on every other slide I have, but I want to make sure you guys have the good overview of information. The allegations made on a school or facility are going to be assessed in the county where that school or facility is located. So in the community where I lived, we had a GNET school who served our psychoeducationally children who needed a higher level of care, and there were constantly reports that came out of that. Either, because an allegation that faculty had done something, or allegation that some child had done something. Faculty, there's always something that came out of that. And like I said, our county would handle that. I think of your regional youth detention centers, if an allegation comes out of that, that goes to the county where that is where that facility is located. If the family lives in a neighboring county, sometimes the same caseworker will go do that. Sometimes the other county may help out with a home visit or whatnot. But that's the only extension of that. Otherwise, it's where the family lives. So you've got a family in Thomas County and the report's on the family in Thomas County. Thomas County is going to be working that case. That's kind of how we run things here at DFCS. CICC notifies the point of contact 24 hours a day, 7 days a week of the report and the assignment, regardless of it being screened in or screened out. You know how I said to screen out, the family wouldn't know about that and nothing would happen. The county still knows about that. Every report that comes in for that county is sent to that county. So someone is receiving it. The point of contacts will change for the counties. There's not one person on 24 hours, 7 days a week. They normally have a daytime person, and then there's, you know, an on-call, you know, for the county that they have that runs the way that they need it to run. That person will be notified, like I said, 24 hours a day. So most of these are going to come through their email, and so they'll know to read them. They'll look at them, and as I've already kind of shared, the county can change the decision made by CICC. So as they're reviewing reports, they're agreeing with or changing decisions. And I've already got to that.
We have
saw a
another
question.
question in
Yes.
the chat box. It's kind of still around the subject. There have been several instances at someone's school where the family has relayed to the school social worker that DFCS workers told them that we did the referral and have read directly from the written report. Is their understanding that the referral should be confidential and they just wanted your perspective?
Yes, they should be confidential. And if that is an instant or alleged, or that is something that's felt to be happened, then that should be addressed with the county, I'd say immediately. The expectation is that the reports are confidential. And I will say, not everyone is great with reading the reports. I could go over a report with the family and did many times and, you know, hit all the highlights of what the concerns were, but kind of left out certain things. And we try to, CICC now tries to kind of leave out certain things too. Like instead of saying, you know, the child told his teacher this morning, they'll kind of take that part out and just said this part was disclosed, not teacher, because that makes it very obvious where the report came from. But I'll say kind of on the flip side of that, if the only mandated reporter involved in the child's life is the school, then there's a chance they're kind of going to guess it's the school. However, there should never be a time where the worker is, you know, reading it so explicitly that the parent's able to figure it out, or the parent is able to quote something that you don't think would be right. I would absolutely follow back up with the county on that, talk to the supervisor of the worker if you've got a relationship with that person. If not, then kind of work up through the levels to give that worker some coaching on how to go over some information without the tell. Like I said, CICC will take out some of that information, so it's not, you know, the child told your teacher this, like that's going to be referenced, but you know, you'll know, we can see who made the report, so you know kind of what the things are. But no, that shouldn't be done. That should be clarified immediately so that workers got some understanding or can explain what happened there. Okay, I forgot that. Okay. All right, so we covered this. Okay. So when the report goes to the county, we went over their initial safety assessments, what the majority of our intakes are. They come in, they get assigned to their classification, like I said, majority of the initial safety assessments, and then intakes are reviewed by the assigned case manager, and they are staffed with a supervisor prior to the allegation being assessed. So like I said, the point of contact is going to get everything. The things that are assigned are going to then be assigned to a worker for assessment. I almost said worker for working, and I realized that just sounded funny, y'all. So the worker is going to take it for assessment. Before being assessed, the worker should be reviewing the history, looking at what we know about the family, and then they're expected to staff it with their supervisor for, you know, next steps, follow up, any, you know, ideas on how to do things. I said the veteran workers already know what they're doing pretty much with these things, and newer workers probably have a longer staffing. Family history should be reviewed because that point, I mean, that just gives you the strongest context clues for where you're going. And whether it's initial safety assessment or a special investigation or any kind of assessment, we're going to group everything that we're doing into an assessment. The children and the family are interviewed. The home is assessed. Collaterals are contacted. We call them collaterals. Everyone else calls them references. It's the same thing. It's a parenting reference, a family reference. It's a reference on how this parent or this caregiver meets this child's needs. And of course, those questions will be tailored specifically to some general situations and then to some specific things. I mean, if we're looking at supervision, because there's an allegation that, the child gets left home alone every night, we're going to ask some questions around supervision. We're going to verify the information that the family has shared, because the family is the subject of the report. They should be able to give answers to all the information that's been said about them. And certainly we know that there's numbers of reports that we get that, could be a misunderstanding or may not be completely true. And sometimes kids say crazy things. Like we've all experienced it, where it sounds really terrible and you get out there and then there's a very reasonable explanation for it. So like I said, we hear from the family on what's happening, what they need, what their views are. We verify the information with all our mandated reporters that may be involved, with doctors and schools, even CASAs, especially if that child's in foster care, whoever else knows this, family in the community, that we can do so reasonably, with some good confidential practice. We're not, sharing everyone's information out there. Lots of families give us relatives to contact or friends, neighbors, things like that. So then we verify that information. If the family would benefit from community services, then we provide those referrals. We get those moving, and that's whether it's for the need that we're out there or for not. If we're out there because it's an allegation of physical abuse, but see this family's really struggling to meet their needs with food, and maybe we help them with, have they applied for food stamps? Are they eligible for food stamps? Walk them through that process, give them a referral for the food pantry. I've personally driven to food pantries many times and just picked up the food for the family and taken it back because it was easier than trying to help find car seats and everything else to get the family there. They said, these are the things I want. And I just went and got it and brought it back. But those referrals need to be done. They need to be done immediately. And that is something DFCS can connect them with, or maybe it's a longer term community service to help meet the need of that family. The initial safety assessment intake will be track assigned based on the absence or presence of present or impending danger. So kind of think about our squirrels. So maybe it's been assigned as a 24-hour because there was some impending danger, and we get out there and assess it. And we determine that there's present danger when we get there, or there's impending danger when we get there. That means we need a safety plan. We need a safety plan. We need to go ahead and work up some, I've lost what I was trying to say there, but work within the parameters that there is something going on in this family's life that could make the child's safety questionable. And so that is something, like I said, we'll do a safety plan, and it's not a parental promise. We say who can, monitor the safety plan, who can be here to provide that support. What do we need to do? We work with the family if there's resources, and those cases will be an investigation. I'm going to say, regardless of what we call them, it's still an assessment, but there's a little bit of different kind of paperwork between an investigation and a family support. And one of the biggest differences is an investigation, to close it, you will substantiate or unsubstantiate. A family support will just close. If we get out to the home, like I said, regardless of the ISA, I mean, it could be an immediate ISA, and we get out to the home and there's no danger assessed. It's a complete misunderstanding. Well, a relative called and said the kids were home alone right now, said the police were there. So it said all this information. We go running out there immediately and no one's home alone. Nothing's there. There's nothing happening. Then that's something that we would assess as a family support. There's no reason there's no present or impending danger, which does not lead to a safety plan. It goes to a family support. Now, for either of those, whether it's an ISA, any ISA, any special investigation, anything we have 45 days to complete the assessment and make a determination. Now, if you were in a Kenny County, which would be Fulton and DeKalb, they have 30 days. So if they have less, they have to move it faster. That is part of one of the legal parameters of the Kenny counties. Everywhere else, it's 45. The assessment can conclude in the following ways. That, like I said, family support case can close. That's ideally what they do. However, if during the family support case, you've gone out to meet your ISA, there was additionally no present or pending danger, and you're working your assessment, you're making your collaterals, getting your references and going through there, and something happens. Say you were out there for a supervision issue and all of a sudden mom has been attacked by her boyfriend, and now there's an episode of domestic violence, and you find out there's more domestic violence going on. The children are disclosing it to you. That's going to create a different sense of urgency in that case. That is going to create an impending danger, and that will then be referred for an investigation. It doesn't necessarily start the process over, but that is something that will then route to an investigation. So at any time during a family support case, if there is a present or impending danger identified, a safety plan will be done, and that will then change in the system after some documentation to a investigation. For a case that's an investigation, they cannot be downgraded if it starts, comes in as an investigation because it's a special kind of circumstance case, meaning, a fatality or, facility, foster parents like that, that starts as an investigation. If there's the absence of information when you get out there or the absence of present or impending danger, despite it being alleged that it was there, it cannot be downgraded. It will say as an investigation. An investigation can close or be, I will say finalized because it's not always closed, not always closed. Can be substantiated or unsubstantiated. It can be closed or open, and you can substantiate and open. You can substantiate and close. You can unsub and open, or you can unsub and close. Traditionally, if you're investigating and there's no concerns, there's no preponderance of the evidence that maltreatment or any maltreatment has taken place, and that's likely something you're going to unsubstantiate and close. There are some cases that are unsubstantiated open. That's when you can't, there isn't the preponderance of the evidence to substantiate the case, but you recognize that there's something going on in this family that they need a substantial amount of resources, and you feel like follow up through family preservation services is going to provide the family what they need. So that's a situation where that can be used. It's not as common, but it certainly does happen, and it can happen. And then you're substantiated as you've got the preponderance of the evidence that there was harm to the child that constituted maltreatment. In those cases, like I said, it could be substantiated and closed. Maybe it happened to the child. But let's say you've got a mom and dad in the home, and mom has a substance abuse problem and has come home one night and physically abused the child in a terrible manner. Maybe, dad was at home at that time. Dad comes home, sees what happens, tells mom, you need to go to treatment. Dad takes the child, goes to a safe place, and dad says, you know what, she's not going to be around the child until she meets this need. I'm going to protect this child, takes care of it. Dad's got all the resources he needs. He's certainly a legal caregiver, certainly capable of taking care of the child. If you've determined that that family has the resources that they need to meet what they need on their own, and that parent is protective, as dad has shown in that example, that he is capable and willing to protect that child, then that may be something that's substantiated and closed. It happened. That child was maltreated, but you've got a protective caregiver who is doing everything they should and could and would do to protect this child. That is something that you're not going to continue to necessarily follow that family. Now, say in that same scenario, dad isn't protective, or he says, I'm going to be protective. I moved to a safe environment with the child. This is what I'm going to do. And then 3 days later, you realize that dad's left the child with mom again because dad went back to work because he said he had supports, but he didn't. And now mom's caring for that child again, but nothing has changed to mitigate her behavior, her safety. She needs services. That would be something that would be open. That case would not be closed. That family needs services, and that caregiver has shown that they don't have the capacity to protect based on their decision making.
And we had someone in the chat box put, if you could repeat the information about when DFCS has less than 45 days to assess.
Yes. So that is for under the Kenny A decree. That is particular to Fulton and DeKalb counties only. So any allegation of maltreatment being assessed in Fulton and DeKalb has 30 days to be completed. So all the same parameters are in place, but theirs is at 30 days and the rest of the state's at 45. So as far as family assessment and services, so like I said, a family support case can lead to an investigation. It doesn't have to, doesn't always, most of them don't, but it can. It can route that way. In order to move a case to family preservation, you've got to either move from an investigation or you've got to back progress from foster care. So you can go either, like I said, family preservation is exactly what it says. You are needing to work with the family to preserve the family. It can look several different ways. Maybe the child is temporarily out of the home, an effective kin placement while something's being worked on. That's not as common, but we certainly do that as well if that has to happen. But ideally, we're working with the intact family as a unit to mitigate the safety concerns or help with the resources that they need during the time to help, change the behavior and give them what they need to be successful in the future without any kind of defects, continue services or intervention. And we have a host of services we can provide, whatever the family needs. We work within our communities and our parameters to help get those services in. Like I said, maybe it's child behavior, and the child behavior is far exceeding the parent's capacity to meet those behavioral needs. I think we've all seen some very challenging child behavior. And so what can we do to provide, intensive therapy for that child, intensive therapy for the parent? Maybe that child needs a psychiatric assessment to determine if there's something medicinally that could help that child's behavior. Is it a behavior that's related to trauma, or is it a behavior related to a psychiatric need? So having those other professionals make those assessments to help give us recommendations of what should be done to help with these things. So like I said, that'd be an investigation, and it doesn't have to be a substantiated investigation. Things that are commonly substantiated and open do go to family pres, like I said, but they could also be an unsubstantiated open that that the family needs additional services that could go to family pres. Like I said, it can also back progress in foster care. So if you've had a foster care case where the children have been removed from the home because legally they weren't safe in the home, there's nothing you can do to keep them safe in the home, they had to be removed, but the family's made very strong progress. The children are safe now. They still need a little more services, but the children are safe and can be returned, because we want the children to return home as soon as they are safe and as soon as that need has been, mitigated. It may not be that the family's completely ready to be away from DFAC services yet, but if that child is safe to go home, the child needs to go home as soon as we can determine that they would be safe. So that case can move from, like I said, from foster care, if we're looking at the other end of the spectrum, back to family pres for some continued monitoring, support, and services during the family pres. And so we're going to put family pres in the middle. If you've got your intake over here and investigations is going to start on the left. If we're going to, kind of work like we read, it's going to start on the left. That's the beginning kind of door, the front door. Your family pres is kind of going to be in the middle of the house. And the back, the foster care is going to be more at the end, all the way on the right. So if you make it completely across the spectrum, you go to foster care. Adoption will be further right than foster care. Like I said, we try to do everything we can to keep a family together and intact, but sometimes that's just not possible. So during the family preservation case manager will ensure the services are provided to the family while the children remain in the custody of their caregivers. Like I said, there are situations where the children are placed outside the home with the caregiver's consent. That is not something DFACS just says, we're going to put your kids somewhere. We can't guarantee that your child's going to remain safe in the home based on the conditions going on in the home. Is there someone else that can help provide care for your child right now while we're working through this? And the parent will say, yes, my sister or my brother or my auntie or my church member or this neighbor, this person has a relationship with my child and this person can help with this. And then we work in, I'd say a contract. It's not a legal contract, but a contract of sorts that, and assess that home, that this child will stay here for, it's no more than 45 days. We're not supposed to have anything that lasts a long time. If that child can't be reunified in that home very, very quickly in a, safety resource type situation, then that's not an appropriate situation. A great example of seeing that used is maybe if the house is, I'll say unsanitary, not unsanitary as in you may go in and think, I really wouldn't want to live here. It's kind of dirty, but like a danger to the child. So maybe you've got a 2-year-old and you've got chemicals on the floor within reach. You've got holes in the floor. You've got exposed wiring. You've got just the worst possible situation that a family could be living in, and the family is trying to mitigate some of those things, trying to maybe work on it themselves and just hasn't been able to do everything with their schedules. So maybe that child's not safe there. So while we work on trying to get some of those things taken care of and cleaned up and set for that child, or better housing, maybe that child goes to, stay with another family member. And not to say the parents can't have free and, willing access, but that child maybe stays with another family member right now while we work to get those needs taken care of. That would be kind of one of those, it's a temporary situation. Like I said, a lot of cases don't go that way, but it's an option if there's we need a week to mitigate this, and that's with the parent's consent. That is not something that can be done without the parent's consent. The parents agree that, yes, I think it's okay for my child to go over here. And sometimes parents volunteer that I need to do this. If my kid could go stay over here for a minute, then I could work on these things and, get them addressed quicker. For a foster care case, so if the child cannot be safely maintained in the home, the situation we talked about isn't something that can be mitigated. Maybe there's no family resources. Maybe the parents moved here from another state. There's no one nearby. There's no community for that parent. There's no, church members or schools or friends or neighbors or anyone that person knows or is comfortable with to care for that child. And there's no other option but to put the child in foster care. Then that is something that through the juvenile court, DFCS will seek temporary custody of the child. That is not something DFCS does on our own. We can't just say we want custody of this child and we just go get the child. That is something that is always going through the juvenile court and has to be approved through the juvenile court for us to act on it. So we would request custody from the court. If the court grants it, then we would then remove that child and we would place that child, become that child's legal caregiver, DFCS would, and we would place that child in a home that we felt the child would be safe in. So we always look for relatives or fictive kin wherever we can. That's our first best option. But like I said, if there's no options available, then we do go with a foster home. And we love our foster homes. They're phenomenal, but we know kids do even better when they can be in their community and with someone they know. So we try to make that. We do everything we can to overcome those hurdles to try to keep a child within their community and with someone that they know and someone they've got a relationship with and someone the family knows. And if that's not an option, then we use our foster parents. So yeah, covered relatives, foster parents, or in a setting to ensure their safety. We do sometimes have kids that have to go to group homes because there's not, and that's not a younger kid. There's going to be more of our teenagers. Our teenagers are historically harder to place because some of our teenagers come with more trauma behaviors, and that's sometimes a lot to take in for a family. All right. So the goal in both family preservation and foster care cases is to provide the needed services for the family, which will create the behavior change of the caregiver to keep the children safe at the home. We are not looking for someone who can check a box. I went to this treatment, I did this, I did that. What you want is someone to learn. And it's really hard to make a determination between someone who kind of, who got everything done but hasn't had a behavior change. We're looking for the change. That helps ensure that that parent has the resources and the capacity now that they need to meet that child's needs, which hopefully will lead them to having a long, amazing life without having any kind of government intervention. Like we take this job seriously, and we know that we represent the government, and government intervening in a family's life is kind of a hard thing to swallow. But it's, we do what we have to do to keep that child safe and to provide the services that are needed. We use family case plans in both family preservation and foster care to denote the goals that the family is working on. The families will have copies of these case plans. They maintain the goals that the family is working on to achieve and account for the demonstrated behavior change. So it's not just, go to treatment, get a certificate. It's, more so than just passing a drug screening and, attending classes is what are your triggers and what are you looking for? And if, relapse is a part of recovery, if we're talking about substance abuse, and if you feel like you're going to relapse, what do you do to keep your child safe? Maybe, you use your mother for that, or use your neighbor, or you make this choice before you make that choice, or, who can you call? We look at all those options to help people mitigate any concerns that may come their way. And then, like I said, for case closure, the family preservation case is that the case plan is met successfully and the family has demonstrated the behavior change, and they're where we have all determined, the family's determined, we've determined that they need to be, then that case can close. Once foster care has, same thing, met the case plan goals, we'd petition the court, tell them this family's met all the goals, and the judge could say, case is closed, we're done with that as well. For cases where the family has not, for foster care cases where the family has not met the behavioral changes, has not met the goals, is not working, and it's very dependent on the child's age. The younger the child is, the quicker the case is supposed to go. But for all cases, there's an expectation that it should be 12 to 15 months. It should not be longer than 12 to 15 months. Like I said, even more so for younger children, where you have not made a substantial change in your life to have this child safely back in your home. At that point in time, we have to start looking at a termination of parental rights. By the time we get to, 15 months, we're already considered it, but at that point, legally, we are pushed to start making very hard decisions about if this parent's rights need to be terminated for this child. And if so, then that opens up adoptive resources for that child. Can the child stay with the relative they're with? Can they stay with the foster parent they're with? Who's best to meet this child's needs, since the family hasn't maybe made any progress toward their case plan or substantial progress. I think it's hard to hear, but there are some cases where like families just mom just falls off the face of the earth, literally just disappears. You know, you go 7, 8 months, you can't find her, don't know where she is, hoping that she's alive. And, you know, there's then nothing done for this 4-year-old child. That's not, reunification is not going to be imminent in that case. That's not going to be in that child's best interest. That parent has absolutely at that point kind of abandoned that child and not shown any interest in making those changes just based on their capacity. So I say if we have questions about that, more specific questions, I can answer that, but I think that's a good overview. And let me address the child and child, because I would say I've got my example slides next, and I was thinking I had a slide that led me to that and I didn't, but I knew I wanted to come back to that because it is a very common question. So in the land of DFACS, child and child is looked at, I want to say 2 different ways. So with, sorry, how to piece this out. I think the common thought is that DFACS always screens out child on child, is that we don't handle that, we don't do with it, not to make a report on that. I think it's very important to make a report on that because it sets, even if the parents are doing everything appropriate, it sets it in our system. So we know historically where it is. So I'll say if it's, say you've got 2 siblings, a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, there has been an incident between them that is vastly inappropriate. Maybe say there's been sexual activity between them, not just touching, somebody didn't grab someone's butt, but been full out sexual activity between those 2 children. And the parents, you know, the victim in that situation, whoever it may be, the 10 or 12-year-old discloses to the parents, and the parents seek services for that. They work to seek services for the child who perpetrated, they work to seek services for the child who's victimized, they work to seek services for their whole family. Those are going to be reports, but you know, they didn't know anything about this prior to the child disclosing. Those are going to be reports that are likely to be screened out. Like I said, there can't ever be 100% guarantee on anything because we look at all the history and other impacts to this, but that is likely to be a screen out because that parent is handling that situation, and us, you know, us as an agency, DFACS, intervening to watch them do what they're supposed to do isn't helping anybody. They're doing what they need to do to protect both their children, the one who perpetrated and the one who's victimized, and getting them services and keeping them separated, changing supervision plans, things like that. Then they're doing everything we would have asked them to do anyway. And there's not a need for us to intervene, like I said, to provide anything because they're doing what they need to do. Now, on the other side of that is, say you've got the same situation. The parents handled it, they intervened, they sought services, they did what they needed to do for that child, but 6 months later, it's happened again. That is going to be more looked at as a supervision problem, which falls under neglect, because whatever the parents did to mitigate the issues didn't actually mitigate the issues, and it continued to happen. And that at that point is something that is very viable for assignment, because that comes in as inadequate supervision because the parents knew that there was a concern between the 2 children and didn't, either what they put in place didn't work or they didn't work. And I've certainly seen a number of cases where sometimes parents are like, oh, I told him not to do it again and he said he wouldn't. And that was the extent of the services. And that's not good enough. Sometimes we don't always have those reports first. But when we know, you know, if a child's come forward and disclosed that, you know, this started happening to me when I was 5 and I'm 9 now, maybe the child tells the school counselor, this is what started happening. And they said, I told my mom, I told my dad, I told my grandma, and we go back and the parents are like, yeah, she told me and I told the brother not to do it again. That's inadequate supervision. The parent knew, the parent was capable of intervening and did not intervene to do anything to protect that child and get that child services. That is absolutely something that DFACS will assess.
I have a comment, Julie, social worker.
I gotta meet you,
need
Julie.
to
I gotta
make
find you.
sure, I want to hear it again. So if
Okay.
we have a child on child, we need to just go ahead and report it anyway and let y'all handle it as far as whether it gets
That's my
screened in, screened
recommendation.
out, or
That's my recommendation, because you won't know what DFACS is doing. What if we're already working with that family? And what if we've kind of got some concerns about the family, but we don't have anything really concrete? But, you know, just, you know, the families that you kind of got that gut feeling something's not right, but you just haven't been able to put your finger on it. You don't have any strong evidence. And that's happening. And we don't know about it because, you know, the school's working with them, or the school's got the information and we've got some information, and that information hasn't crossed paths. You don't know what we're doing. We don't know what you're doing. Like, that's, I think it's very important. That may be that piece of information that we need to really keep that child safe. Like I said, and if it's not someone we're working with, so we don't know this family at all, that information comes in and, the family's doing what they need to do, and we screen that out. I mean, it's a valid report. We screen that out, but then it happens again, then we'll know that, wait, we had this report and this is what happened. And here it is. So I
Ms.
recommend
McDougall,
a
I
report.
love to hear you say this, so thank you very much. I am team what you're saying.
Good. All right. I like you, Julie. You've been helping me out a lot. I don't know you, but I don't even know where you're from, but I like you. I appreciate your comments.
Hey, Nicole, do we have, I think we're gonna run out of time before the scenarios, and we've covered a couple scenarios within the questions. I
Mhm.
just want to make sure that you're able to finish your content, and if you are okay, if we put your email address,
That's fine.
in the chat box, so that if people have, continual questions, but I wanted to make sure we got to the question I said we would get to.
Yes.
So back to school truancy
Mhm.
and reporting educational neglect. How is that different from the attendance review board? What you are covering in educational neglect?
So, all right, best way to explain that is, as I mentioned, like every region and across the state, there are 14 regions, and counties are divided up geographically into a region. And regions kind of handle things differently. Some counties handle things differently. Some counties don't actually have a truancy review board. So in the counties where I know there is a truancy review board, the DFCS there have that expectation, if that child is truant, if there is educational neglect, that move through that process first. And I think those counties will screen those out until you have covered that process. Some counties in the state, actually a decent amount of counties in the state, don't have a truancy review board. So their only option is to call DFCS. There's not a judge that oversees it, that hears it. I think that's very sad, because I think having a truancy review board can maybe meet some of the issues and mitigate it and clear it before it has to come to DFCS. But when in doubt, I was like, it's not wrong either way. I just know, just be prepared if you've got a truancy review board and you go ahead and it's not wrong to make the report to DFCS. You can go ahead and do it and say where it is in the truancy review board or what it's been done. I wouldn't be surprised if it gets screened out, either by CICC or the county, because it needs to go through that process. It's a different story when you've been through the process at the truancy review board and have that recommendation that now it's time for DFCS to intervene because everything's been done. So that's, if you've got that, please make sure that information is included in your report, because that would be very good for that county to know.
Thank you. And one more question before we head out. I put Nicole's email address in the chat box. If you guys do have follow-up questions for her, since we're not able to get to all of them today, she has graciously, allowed us to put that in the chat box for you all. I have one more question, and it's just a little bit, if you can cover, when should people involve the Office of the Child Advocate, OCA, when it's appropriate to involve them, as kind of the checks and balances that DFCS has as well?
So I'll say OCA is like, I think on their website, I think it says Watchdog Agency. I would think more like Big Brother, but that is something that is there, as Jill said, to be a check and a balance for DFCS. So if there is a significant concern that DFCS isn't handling something correctly, or there's been a violation of rights or something like that, I think that's something that then would get reported to the Office of the Child Advocate, and they have workers that have access to our system, and they would go in and look at the case and offer any insights or suggestions if they have concerns as well. I know there have been reviews from times when they haven't had any concerns and they are familiar with our policies and know how to access them, and things are maybe not being done the way the person wants them to be done, but they're being done within our policies, which is the expectation. And on the flip side of that, if there is a concern about the way something's handling, then they would reach out to that local leadership. For me, I'd say, as someone in leadership, I know I've always wanted people to come to me if there was something uncomfortable. So I think, for kind of speaking on behalf of the counties, if there's something that you can work with that county on, like the question earlier talked about not having a resource at the county office where the county office is closed and not being able to get in touch with somebody, I would say, like, start with the supervisor or the county director and give them the chance to fix it first. And if they can't fix it and it's not going, then that is something that is appropriate to go to the Office of Child Advocate. And that's just my preference. And that's speaking for me, that I would, for anyone that I manage, I would prefer them, if possible, to come to me first if there's a problem, to give me a chance to fix it before they went to, my boss or anyone else. But that's just me speaking, but I also know that there could be a time where maybe there's a different relationship challenge there. So that would be the appropriate time to engage them or constituent services or, anyone else that, helps to ensure that everything within DFACS is being handled within our policies and our expectations.
Thank you, Nicole. That's very helpful to get that. So go to your local county offices first to see what's going on. Let me get a better link. So in the chat box, I'm going to repost an evaluation link because it says that one. So eval link. And if someone can give me a thumbs up or a yes that that second link I just posted is working, to get a certificate of attendance, you will have to fill out that evaluation link. At the end of it, it'll give you another link to get a certificate so that your certificate information isn't linked to your evaluation. We keep them separate. I just wanted to give a really big thank you to Nicole McDougald for giving us her expertise and a lot of nuances that we might not always get in shorter mandated reporter trainings or in general information, and to be here to answer questions for us that applies to our specific situations. Awesome. I see that that works. So please grab that link. I saw a couple of you had multiple people joining with one login today. If you can just copy that link and have all of those people fill that out, that will be great. So they can all receive a certificate of attendance. So you don't need to put your email in the chat box. Just copy and paste that certificate link, the evaluation link, and you can send it to everyone who needs that in your agency that is joined on this page today, this webinar. We are waiting for approval before we can post this recording. So look on our website in a couple days. It'll be under training and then webinars, and we'll try to get something on there. If not the recording, then a couple of the slides or some of the most relevant information out there for you all. But we'll also have Nicole's information there as well. So thank you again, Nicole. We really appreciate you coming on, getting these hard-hitting questions and being the expert for us. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.